Imagine waking up one morning, right, and discovering that the car you rely on, maybe the one you're still paying off, is suddenly, well, basically worthless in your own city. That's the stark reality unfolding for millions of drivers across India. A massive policy shift is forcing them into this choice: scrap their vehicle or watch it become unusable.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into India's age-based vehicle ban. And this isn't just about old cars.
hmm
It's a policy hitting livelihoods, environmental health, and yeah, the future of a whole industry.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack the complex story behind this ban. We're asking the big question: is this genuinely about public health, about clearing India's notoriously polluted skies? Or is there a significant push, maybe even a hidden one, from the powerful auto industry? Are they benefiting at the expense of, well, ordinary citizens? We're going to explore the science, the profound human impact, and the economic forces driving all this using the detailed sources we've gathered. Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we get into all the controversy, what's the official line? What's the stated why behind the ban? Our sources definitely point towards a major environmental concern.
Right. The official rationale is pretty clear. It's rooted in public health and improving air quality. And this policy, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It originates from orders by India's Supreme Court and the National Green Tribunal. Their core finding was essentially that these end-of-life vehicles, they're just disproportionately polluting.
Disproportionately polluting. Okay, but what does that actually look like in real terms?
Well, the data paints a pretty stark picture. Older vehicles, specifically the ones before the BSVI emission standards came in, that's Bharat Stage 6, the strictest ones India has, they spew out something like 4 to 10 times the particulate matter compared to modern cars. Just think about that. One old car doing the polluting work of, maybe 10 new ones.
Wow, 4 to 10 times. That's a huge difference. So how big of a problem is this in a city like, say, Delhi?
In Delhi, yeah, the environment minister mentioned that vehicles contribute about 20% to 30% of the city's PM 2.5. That's the really fine particulate matter, the stuff that's super dangerous when you breathe it in. So getting rid of the dirtiest vehicles is seen as like a pivotal step, a really key move for cleaner air.
Makes sense.
And the data backs this up. There was a report from the Center for Science and Environment. They're a major environmental think tank. It found that cars made before 2005, which are only about 5% of all the cars on the road, they're responsible for almost 70% of all the pollution from vehicles. 70%.
From just 5% of the cars? That's staggering.
It is. And it's similar for trucks. Heavy trucks built before the year 2000, they emit a massive 10 to 35 times more particulate matter than the modern BSBI ones.
So it's really this specific older segment causing most of the trouble. And the health connection. That's the main driver.
That's the primary argument, yes. Reducing these pollutants, the PM 2.5, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, the goal is to directly lower rates of asthma, bronchitis, heart disease, all those things linked to bad air. And the situation in Delhi is quite alarming. Hospitals there report like a 30% jump in kids' asthma admissions right after Diwali when pollution spikes. And estimates suggest about a third of Delhi's children already have asthma or some kind of breathing impairment. So the official stance is clear. Every ton of pollution avoided saves lives, saves healthcare costs.
Okay, right. But here's where it gets really interesting, maybe difficult. Those environmental goals are clear, sure. But our sources point to a pretty significant human cost. What does this policy actually mean for ordinary people, especially those, in the middle and lower income groups?
Yeah, this is the crux of the problem for many. It imposes really substantial financial burdens, often on the people who can least afford it. See, these older vehicles, they're often owned by middle or lower income individuals. Maybe they bought them on loan, expected to use them for, say, 15 years, maybe even longer with fitness checks. And now suddenly this asset, something that might represent years of savings, or maybe they're still paying off the loan, it just becomes worthless much, much sooner than they ever anticipated.
Worthless. How worthless are we talking? What kind of compensation do people actually get when they scrap their car?
Well, imagine this. Your car, maybe it's your primary tool for work, maybe it's just essential for your family. Suddenly, its scrap value is only about 4% to 6% of what you originally paid for it.
Only 4 to 6%, yeah.
So owners are basically losing around 94% of the vehicle's value. Even with the small tax rebate they might get, it's hardly an incentive. It feels more like a forced financial hit for these families.
That's brutal. So it's not just about personal cars, right? Who else gets hit hard by this?
Oh, absolutely. It creates huge financial stress. Families might already have loans, and now they're forced into taking out new loans just to get essential transport again. And think about small business owners, taxi drivers, delivery van drivers. For them, it's immediate income loss until they can figure out how to afford a replacement.
So what are people actually feeling about this? Is there any sense of what owners want?
Well, there was a nationwide poll mentioned in our sources. It found that owners overwhelmingly would prefer a system based on vehicle fitness or mileage, not just a strict age cutoff. And a big majority, something like 65%, want much higher scrappage incentives than the current kind of meager tax break.
So they want fairness, basically. Better compensation or a different system altogether. What are they doing in the meantime?
In practice, we're seeing people trying alternatives. Some are selling their older vehicles to buyers in other states where the rules are different, where they're still legal to drive. Others, if they just can't afford a new car, they're forced to shift to public transport, assuming it's even a viable option for them.
Okay, so that covers the impact on individuals. Now let's pivot a bit. What does all this mean for the very powerful auto industry in India? It feels like this policy could be a massive boost for them, right?
That's definitely the perception, and there's some logic to it. The vehicle manufacturers, the dealers, they certainly stand to gain. Even the road transport minister estimated that scrapping old cars could potentially increase new car sales by something like 18 to 20%.
18 to 20%. That's huge.
It is. And industry analysts, like the credit rating agency ICRA, they also expect significant replacement demand, especially when you consider there are about 1.1 million heavy commercial vehicles over 15 years old out there. That's a lot of potential new truck sales.
Right. Now, some critics are using pretty strong words like conspiracy or scam. What's behind that level of accusation? Is it just about increased sales?
Well, this is where the controversy really ignites. Critics argue the policy isn't just incidentally helping the industry, but that it might be designed to favor it at the direct expense of consumers. There's an example cited in the sources that kind of illustrates this point. Dealers are apparently using these scrap certificates, maybe worth $30,000, to offer a much larger tax discount, say 2.5 lakh, specifically on luxury cars.
Wait, how does that work?
It seems like it becomes a sort of hidden discount mechanism. It boosts the sales of high-margin vehicles and helps the dealer's bottom line far more than it actually benefits the person who originally scrapped their old, maybe low-value car.
Ah, I see. So the benefit flows upwards towards the new car buyer and the dealer, not the original owner.
Exactly. And that's why some critics are using those strong terms like conspiracy or scam, suggesting it's engineered to prop up the auto industry.
That's definitely a concerning angle. How is this whole situation affecting the used car market then? Is it just Delhi or wider?
It's causing ripples for sure. In the short term, there's disruption. All these older cars from Delhi that are suddenly illegal, they're flooding into neighboring markets, states like UP and Haryana. So that pushes up the supply of cheap older cars there, but it might actually lower prices for slightly newer, say, sub-10-year-old used cars within the Delhi NCR region because people are looking for compliant vehicles.
So demand shifts towards younger used cars.
Right. And what's also really taking off is the organized scrapping business and the market for these scrap certificates. These government-approved places, the RVSS-registered vehicle scrapping facilities, they issue the certificates. We mentioned they might be worth $20,000 or $30,000, but then these certificates become kind of tradable commodities used primarily by dealers and new car buyers to get those discounts, again, often benefiting them more than the original seller.
And is there a risk the old cars aren't actually disappearing?
That's a major concern, the leakage issue. The worry is that these old, polluting vehicles aren't being properly scrapped and recycled, but are just being moved to areas with less strict enforcement. So you're not eliminating the pollution, just shifting it somewhere else.
Which kind of defeats the purpose, doesn't it? This raises a big question then. How is this complex policy actually being rolled out on the ground, and what are the other specific criticisms bubbling up?
Well, implementation definitely varies. Delhi NCR is really at the forefront, which often happens with environmental rules in India. Since July 1st, 2025, they've moved into what they call hard enforcement. Over 500 fuel stations now have these ANPR cameras, automatic number plate recognition.
Right, the plate readers.
Exactly. They're linked to the National VAN Vehicle Database. If your vehicle is flagged as too old or non-compliant, the system can actually automatically cut off fuel supply at the pump.
Wow, automatically.
Yeah. They ran a pilot phase and identified nearly 500,000 older vehicles. Delhi alone has something like 6 million vehicles classified as end of life, and interestingly, about 2/3 of those are two-wheelers.
6 million? That's a lot of vehicles. Are they actually managing to enforce it?
Enforcement teams are actively impounding vehicles. They've got around 44,000 so far. And the plan is to expand this kind of enforcement to nearby cities like Gurugram and Noida soon, by November 2025.
That sounds pretty aggressive. How does that compare to other places, like Maharashtra, for instance?
Yeah, it's quite a contrast. Maharashtra has taken a more, let's say, incentive-based approach so far. They haven't imposed a strict age ban on personal petrol or diesel cars yet. Instead, they offer a 15% rebate on the registration tax if you scrap an old vehicle when you buy a new one. But there's also a committee looking into a potential full ban for Mumbai, so the pressure is building there too.
So we have this tension, this push-pull between the environmental goals and the real impact on citizens' lives and wallets. What are the main criticisms about how this whole thing is designed and being put into practice?
Well, fairness and legality are huge ones. Owners argue, quite forcefully, that forcing a well-maintained older car off the road violates their rights, especially since, the updated motor vehicles laws technically allow for 15 years of use, sometimes with extensions, if it passes fitness tests.
And applying it backwards retrospectively seems tricky legally.
Very contentious. It's being challenged in courts. And then there's the argument many experts make. Age alone is just a blunt instrument. It's too simplistic. The common saying you hear is age doesn't pollute. Poorly maintained engines do. So the call is for strict pollution testing, fitness checks, rather than just an arbitrary age limit.
So focus on the actual pollution, not just the car's birthday. Makes sense.
Precisely. Then there's the economic burden, which we've touched on, how it disproportionately hits lower middle class folks and small business owners. And implementation challenges are real. People finding ways around it, like fueling up outside Delhi or using fake NOCs, those no objection certificates needed for transfers.
Fake NOCs, so people are trying to game the system.
Seems like it. And experts point out, at the current rate they're impounding vehicles, it could take literally decades to clear the millions of non-compliant vehicles just in Delhi.
Decades, wow.
Yeah. And then, circling back, there's that central controversy about potential government-industry collusion. The perception of a hidden subsidy for automakers and high-end buyers just won't go away, plus a less discussed point, but still valid. Scrapping millions of cars creates its own waste problem, and manufacturing new cars releases CO2. So are we potentially offsetting some of the air quality gains with other environmental impacts?
That's a really interesting point, too. So with all these criticisms flying around, is the government listening? Are they making any changes?
There are signs they might be reevaluating. The Ministry of Road Transport and Highways North is reportedly re-examining the rules. One possibility being discussed is shifting towards phasing out vehicles based on their emission norms, like pre-BSI, PS2, rather than just pure age. That would address some of the age versus performance arguments. And the Supreme Court itself has asked for formal representation on the grievances raised by vehicle owners. So there's some movement.
Okay, this is fascinating. We have all these competing claims, strong arguments on both sides. But what does the actual data tell us so far? How effective has this policy really been?
Right. Let's look at the evidence we have. On air quality and emissions, the studies do seem to support the basic premise. That IIT Bombay survey finding older vehicles cause 70% of pollution.
Right.
That's significant. And the Delhi trial data showing older flag vehicles emit about 4.5 times more particulates than new BS6 cars. That also suggests scrapping should lead to real pollution reduction.
So the science, at least on the pollution potential, seems to lean towards the ban being effective in theory. What about the health impact data?
In terms of direct health outcomes linked specifically to this ban, it's probably too early to have conclusive data. Measurements take time. But the broader context is undeniable. That Lancet report saying nearly 1.7 million deaths in India annually are linked to air pollution. That's a staggering number. Given Delhi's child asthma rates and the hospital surges during pollution peaks, even a modest improvement in PM2.5 levels could have significant public health benefits down the line.
And economically, has it actually driven those massive new car sales the industry hoped for?
Well, economically, the picture seems more mixed, maybe even disappointing for the proponents. ICRA estimated only about 44,000 private vehicles were scrapped by August 2024.
Only 44,000. That sounds low.
It is quite low, especially compared to the hopes of scrapping nearly 9 lakh eligible heavy vehicles. And apparently most of those 44,000 were government vehicles, not private citizens voluntarily scrapping their cars. This suggests that the current voluntary schemes with the low incentives just aren't very appealing to consumers.
So uptake is low, and legally.
Legally and administratively, the policy's foundation in Delhi NCR is pretty solid because of those Supreme Court orders. But expanding a strict age limit nationwide doesn't have that same direct court backing yet, and the retrospective application issue remains legally contentious.
Okay, so if we try to connect all these threads, looking at the bigger picture,
hmm
what's the path forward? How can India potentially achieve cleaner air without maybe unfairly hitting its citizens so hard?
Yeah, that's the tightrope walk, isn't it?
Yeah.
The core tension is clear. Older vehicles are a major pollution source. Replacing them should, in theory, improve air quality. But the evidence of real harm to consumers, the financial losses, the court petitions, that's also undeniable. Our sources suggest a potential path forward that tries to balance both goals, environment and fairness. A key recommendation is to fundamentally shift away from pure age cutoffs, move towards stringent regular fitness checks and actual pollution tests. If a well-maintained older car passes the emission tests, maybe it can stay on the road.
That seems much more targeted, right? Focus on the actual polluters. What about the money side for owners?
Definitely. The other big recommendation is to significantly enhance the compensation. Offer much more substantial scrappage bonuses, maybe 20–25% of a new car's cost, not just 4–6% of the old one's value. And combine that with interest-subsidized loans, especially for lower-income individuals or commercial vehicle operators who rely on their vehicle for their livelihood.
So make it genuinely feasible for people to transition.
Exactly. And alongside that, strengthen the recycling infrastructure. Make sure when cars are scrapped, the materials are recovered properly and in an environmentally sound way. Plus, continuous monitoring is vital. Publish transparent data on air quality changes, health statistics, scrappage rates, build public trust through openness. And finally, really engage with stakeholders. Bring citizen groups, consumer advocates into the policy review process. Listen to their concerns, fine-tune the policy based on real-world feedback.
That sounds like a much more balanced approach. Just to quickly cover a couple of common questions listeners might have. If you have a well-maintained older car right now, can you get an exemption?
Currently, no. At least in Delhi NCR, the bans are strictly age-based. Maintenance doesn't get you a pass yet.
And what happens to the scrapped cars? Is the metal recovered?
Generally, yes. Estimates suggest around 80% of the metal from scrap vehicles is recovered and potentially recycled.
Are people replacing these old cars with EVs?
Some are, but EV uptake is still facing challenges, higher upfront costs, charging infrastructure limitations. It's not yet a mass replacement solution for most people affected by the ban.
And what about two-wheelers? You mentioned they are a big part of the numbers.
They are definitely affected by the age limits too. But the general sense is that enforcement for two-wheelers is, well, often described as lamer or less strict compared to cars and commercial vehicles.
Right. Well, this deep dive really shows what a complex issue this is, India's age-based vehicle ban. It truly sits at this crossroads, doesn't it, between ambitious environmental goals and the very real, often tough, socioeconomic realities faced by millions.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate success or failure of this policy will really hinge on whether it manages to genuinely clear the skies without placing an unfair, unsustainable burden on its citizens.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, thinking about these kinds of broad policy impacts? Will history remember this as a bold, decisive public health win, a necessary step for cleaner air? Or will it be seen more as a heavy-handed subsidy for the auto industry, one where ordinary consumers ended up shouldering most of the cost? Definitely something to mull over as we all think about what a truly sustainable future looks like.